Stephanie, I'm going to say good morning to everyone first. And just a reminder to folks, if you are on task force, to please, if you can, have your camera on. And if you remember the public for now, please keep your cameras off. That'll just help us from a facilitation standpoint. But good morning to each of you. And Stephanie, I'm going to hand it over to you to run us through a few things.
Great. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here, and especially so early, and happy April to everybody. Time is going fast. I am going to go ahead and we're going to actually just do a regular roll call, just because having so many members, if you will, and guests has made it a little bit difficult for us to do that. So if I say your name, would you please just say here, old school, elementary school, sort of fashion. So I'm going to start with Dawn Alexander.
Here.
Great. Yolanda.
Here.
Kevin Bishop.
Here.
Samantha Carlin. Is Sam here yet? All right, we will come back.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Hi,
Sorry.
Sam.
It took me a minute to run to the phone. I have it in my ear.
No worries. Welcome. Carlos Castillo.
Good morning. Here.
Awesome. Hi there. Ashley Chase.
Here.
Excellent. Jill Cohen.
Here.
Michelle Dossie.
Here.
Thank you. Jessica Daughter.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning, Jessica. Tara Dockstader.
Yeah, Doc Stater here.
Dockstader. Thank you, Tara. Ida Drury.
Hot. That means I'll be having hot lunch in the cafeteria with the elementary theme.
I forgot about that. Thank you for that throwback. Jennifer.
Here, good morning.
Excellent. Hi, Jennifer. Leanna Gavin.
I'm here.
Hello. Good morning. Zane.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nate Halpern.
Here.
Great. I sound like I'm giving out bingo prizes or something, don't I? I just caught that tone. It's very perky. Okay. Adriana.
Here.
Lori Jenkins.
Here.
Shayna Karan.
Here.
Excellent. Tess. Is Tess McShane here yet? Okay, we'll come back. Maria Mendez.
Here.
Kristen Menz.
Here.
Great. Hello. Michelle Murphy, we know is going to be delayed. Michael Nicoletti. Okay, we'll come back. Margaret Ochoa, I saw you. Yes, you just told me you're sitting down. Colleen O'Neill.
Colleen O'Neill's here too. Hi, Margaret.
Excellent. Sarah Hillsticker.
Here.
Great. Good morning, Sarah. Let's see. Roshan Kalantar.
Here.
And Brynja, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, Brynja. Here.
Brynja, beautiful name. Hello, good morning. Nikki.
Here.
Excellent. Kathy Wells.
Here.
Yes, Donna Wilson.
I'm here.
Elsie Works. Not yet. Okay, Jade Woodard.
Here.
Excellent. Good morning. And I am here. So wonderful. Thank you for that little exercise. The next order of business that we have is approval of the meeting minutes from February 1, 2023. All of you should have those in your possession. They were in your materials. And with that, has everybody had an opportunity to review those? Just a show of hands, nods. Fantastic. Are there any additions or corrections that need to be made to these minutes? Okay, seeing none, if I could have a motion to pass the February 1 meeting minutes as well as a second.
Morning.
If I could have a motion, please, to pass the meeting.
I'll make a motion to pass the minutes.
Thank you, Kevin.
I'll-
Bishop.
I'll second.
Great. Thank you. Jennifer, you were the second?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Is there anybody opposed to the passage of these February 1, 2023 meeting minutes? Okay, great. Those meeting minutes will pass then. Thank you all. And next up on our order of business, we get to announce our vice chair. We had a volunteer, Dr. Kathy Wells. Thank you for your volunteerism and welcome as our new vice chair. And so thank you for your willingness to serve. It'll be wonderful to have you on this team as our chair, our vice chair. All right. Otherwise, I think that is it for me, Trace, in terms of business.
That's it. Thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate it. Good morning, all, and thanks for being here. And Alexis, thanks for keeping an eye on the waiting room. We have folks still coming in, so we'll be tracking it that way. We have a few more orders of business before I hand it off to Doris. Hopefully folks read their emails from Jordan, because that's what I'm mostly going to be referencing. And we're going to be making a couple of shifts as far as processes. And so I'm going to explain some of those. Some of it is just repeating what you already read in an email, but just want to make sure folks have a clear understanding of how we're moving things forward. So the first piece I want to go over is that we're moving everything over as far as materials available to you as members of the task force, and also for members of the public. We're moving everything to Google Drive. We were just receiving a lot of feedback with our Dropbox that there were a lot of challenges in accessing resources and sharing and whatnot. So we just made the executive decision. We're moving over to Google Drive, and I love Google Drive. So that's the good news for me. If you have any questions or feedback, we're going to do an exit survey today. And so there's going to be an opportunity for you to just say, yes, this is working for me, or I'm having challenges with this and could use some support getting through that. So just let us know. But that was the intention behind switching to Google Drive. The other thing that you're going to see in the Google Drive that we've added that's different than on Dropbox is we're starting to get a lot of articles from folks, articles about this task force, articles about cases across the state, readings that folks want to be make us aware of, et cetera. We'll do our best to curate that and share when appropriate with the task force, but we also wanted a landing spot because we're not going to be able to, we don't want to send out a one-off email every time we receive something, but we do want folks to be aware of the materials and resources that folks are sharing. So in that Google Drive will be a shared media. It's a really simple file, honestly, where we're going to be kind of cataloging everything that we receive. So if you have shared something and you don't see it reflected there, please let us know. But I believe we've done to date, things that folks have shared, and we'll keep reminding you via email where that is as well. So just wanted to give that a call out. Jordan, you can go to the next slide. The next piece that I want to go over is that you also received a meeting recap. And so this is also a little bit of a different shift. The meeting recap is really your homework. We know that that's always your standing homework as task force members. And really the purpose behind that is a number of things. One, we want to provide you with a refresh prior to the next meeting. So that's a big one, because I don't know about you, but when the next time we have these meetings, sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, what did we just talk about? So that's going to be in the recap. Another one will be, it's a preview of what will be included in the interim and final reports. And so, in the spirit of not wanting there to be any surprises as to how we're capturing these conversations, how we're documenting as we move along, we're going to be taking things directly from these recaps as well in service of the interim and final reports. So that's a great way to see how we're shaping that up. And then let's see. Also, it creates an opportunity for you all to read something and give us feedback as far as agenda setting and the way that we're moving through meetings as task force members. And the last piece is I just want to note that it might feel like, well, what's the difference between a recap and meeting minutes? We don't want you to have to, our meetings are pretty transcript because we want the accountability of like, capturing all the conversations and nuances of what is a pretty technical conversation. And the recap really serves as a way for you to read through, to understand. But if you want to get technical, you are welcome to go back into the minutes that Alexis does a fantastic job on. But we don't want you to have to read through pages and pages of transcript notes if that's not what you're wanting to do. So any questions so far about kind of what I've laid out, but again, that these are all linked in the emails that'll be coming ahead of each meeting. And the expectation really is that you read that recap so that we're not using this time to do that recap, and that we really use this time to just get going on the meeting itself. Any questions? Or Stephanie, anything I missed from your perspective? Okay. All right, great.
I have a question, Trace.
Yeah, please.
As far as comments and changes to that, I know we talk about that for the minutes, but how would we add something that was missed or give feedback on that?
Are you talking about on the recap?
Yes.
Yeah. So on the recap would just be a direct conversation back to us about that. We can also, let's see, your opportunity for feedback on the minutes and also on the recap would be just a note to any of the facilitators or Jordan or Stephanie as well. The opportunity for feedback to a particular meeting, just like the facilitation, the content itself, is going to come in an exit survey that we'll do after each meeting. So does that make sense on the two different ways? Okay, cool. Great question. Thanks for asking. Anybody else there before we move on? Okay, cool. And again, if you have feedback as we go along and something is not making sense to you, or you're feeling frustrated with the system we've set up, just reach out, and happy to support however I can. All right, Jordan, we're going to move on to the next page. Now, we're doing this, I don't want to say a little backwards, but we want to set, this is a long process, a long conversation, and we're not a task force that is going by bylaws. And so we wanted to create a container, as we do Keystone. We do this with all of our task forces that don't have formal bylaws, as just a way to ensure that we're grounded in some, what I would call pretty simple language overall. And really, it's all things that we've discussed. There should not be any surprises in here, but there is a charter that's going to be in the external file, so in the Google file, where you can read through, and you'll also have the opportunity today in the survey to provide any feedback you'd like here. But really, the five main things are outlined here: the mission and the charge. Those were noted in the overview document. The outcomes with the report, and what this task force is, what this task force is not. We talk around, is the goal of this task force consensus? We talk about, is like, how are we going to get where we say we're going to get based on what our charges are? So I do encourage folks to just read through that to ensure that we're on the same page, but really that's all pulled from the bill itself. And just trying to make sure that that if folks were wanting to read that and understand more about the task force, that this would be an easy place to go to. The piece around ground rules, these are also things we've discussed we're all adults here, and this task force so far has been a really fantastic example of how to have conversations that where differing perspectives are brought, and that really is what the ground rules capture, is just a space for that. We do that in writing because it's a best practice, but again, this task force, I would say, so far has been a really model example for us. And then the last piece is media protocols, really that we're just asking folks that if you would like support, and if you get media outreach and how you want to share what we're working on and what we're doing, we just have some best practices in there and things that we would appreciate. And we also just want to make sure that we know what's out there so that we have an opportunity to have dialogue when folks are wanting to have dialogue. So that is the overview of the charter. Doris, anything I'm missing there? Wanted to just make sure that I'm covering everything that we chatted about.
Nope, I think you got everything.
Okay. Stephanie, from your perspective? Okay. Any overall questions? Again, you'll have an opportunity to give feedback directly to this if you feel we haven't captured something. It's overall a formality, that we can point back to. And that just keeps us the guardrails that we've already talked about in the task force. So. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. And again, that'll be also in the Google Drive. Everything's in the Google Drive. I love it. All right, Jordan, we're going to move on to the next. This is exciting news, very exciting news, in my opinion. So this actually is coming from conversations we've had both in the task force and also as facilitators. We have a lot of work to do, and the amount of meetings that we have, quite frankly, are not going to cut it to get where we need to go. And we're also if I know a number of you have been sitting in the Timothy Montoya meeting, we are doing something very similar where we're adding some interim meetings. We're shortening those meetings, and we're just going to we're adding 4 to the calendar for this year. So you'll notice we haven't scheduled these out through the following year yet, because we want to see, is this hitting the mark? Does this feel like the right move to task force members? But just from a purely looking at the agenda, looking at the directives, the amount of directives we have, we need some more time to get. And so the way that we're thinking about these meetings is kind of twofold. And I'm getting some feedback. Can anybody hear that? Okay, so make sure you're on mute if you don't mind. But the biggest thing here is, so we'll have the dates here. We haven't sent out calendar invites yet because we didn't want you to get a calendar invite and wonder, what is this? But the biggest piece about this is twofold. One, if there is a continued need to continue a conversation that we didn't quite wrap up in a meeting, we'll do it in these meetings. So for instance, if in this meeting, we feel a little unfinished with some of the directives that we're getting towards and the conversation we're having, then we'll carry that over to the May 10th meeting. And we'll finish that conversation there in an effort to, at the next regular meeting, be ready to go on the next piece that we have laid out in the agenda. And Doris will talk a little bit about the roadmap, and some of this will make sense there. The other piece that it could be is that there are some underlying topics that we know will be need multiple touch points and multiple conversations over the next 2 years. And as those surface, this will also be a great time to continue to revisit those topics. I don't want to put us in a corner yet on what exactly those topics are, but I know that there are some hot button issues that will just need continued conversation. And so this is an opportunity really to do that. So again, the meetings will be 2 hours. They'll be on the off months, and we'll send you a calendar invite. But Stephanie, as chair, I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of speak anything in addition to what I just said around the thinking and kind of the hope and having these additional meetings, because it is an additional ask of task force members, and we know that.
It is. And I think that one thing that we have noticed is that after meetings, we could keep going. Right? We could keep talking and talking, and there's just so much more. And I know that I personally have felt just concerned that even public comment, right, is so brief, and people are coming forward with so much information. And so really going to these expanded meetings just allows us that expansion of time so that we can settle into conversations more deeply. We can be more responsive to the panel, but also to the public. And really, this is the best way to do it. I also will just note, and I lost track of how many charges we have, but I think we're at 17 or 18. Different subject matter areas that we are required to address, including the big question, which we're talking about today, which is the effectiveness of mandated reporting laws. Like, that's not a small topic. So by way of saying, this just gives us the breadth and the depth to get that work done. But yeah, I think that that's all I really have probably to add on that, Trace.
Thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate that. Want to give folks a chance to share any thoughts or questions on our thinking here from the task force. And I know it's 8:23 in the morning, so maybe you don't have any quite yet. Okay. Just wanted to give an opportunity. Again, in the exit survey, there's an opportunity to just give general feedback to the things we laid out today. So as we go along, if you're thinking any sort of feedback for us, please include that. We do read each of those, so appreciate that. Okay, that wraps up. I know it's a lot of business. It's 8:23. We've done a lot of talking without a lot of substance, but I hope that we're on the same page. We understand the systems of how we're going to keep things organized moving forward, and really excited to just have some of these new systems in place. So appreciate y'all's patience there. Doris, I'm going to hand it over to you to get into today's directive. Thanks.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Trace. All right, so today we are going to really begin to provide some additional insights and perspectives in service of answering this question around effectiveness. And we are couching this question of whether or not the Colorado's mandatory reporting laws are effective in serving children and families in Colorado into this broader context of the child welfare system. And this question of sort of if the role of child welfare is in Colorado is to strengthen the ability of families to protect and care for their own children, to minimize harm to children and youth, and ensure timely permanency planning. If that is the goal, and we know that for systems across the country, whether they articulated in those exact words or not, that is effectively the role of child welfare, naming that there's a larger conversation happening around kind of the broadness or narrowness of child welfare, but by and large, that is the mandate for child welfare. When we think about mandatory reporting and this front door kind of decision point and effectiveness, we want it to be into that in that context. And so then the sub questions then become, to what extent is Colorado's mandatory reporting laws helping to achieve those broader goals of child welfare? And conversely, in what ways does Colorado's mandatory reporting law inhibit those goals, so work against those goals? So we're gonna focus in on those second two questions again. Sort of accepting that the role of child welfare is as I already described. We're going to hear from through the course of the next several of these task force meetings. We're going to hear from the perspectives of individuals, many coming from this task force, who have a role to play and or have experienced the child welfare system from a particular point of view, so that we can have a deeper understanding from all of those points of view in answering those two questions as to whether or not and to what extent Colorado's mandatory reporting law supports or reinforces, is aligned with, helps to achieve those broader child welfare goals, and then also where are the pain points where the mandatory reporting laws actually works against those particular goals that child welfare has. Today, we are really appreciative of the several task force members who represent individuals who have experienced the child welfare system from the perspective of being a child and or parent who has had involvement. And we're going to ask them to help inform, again, those two questions as to, to what extent their experiences reflect mandatory reporting laws that were helped to achieve in service of those broader child welfare goals, and where there are some certainly some opportunities for improvement, and where from their perspective, mandatory reporting laws worked against those broader goals. Before we introduce the panelists, I wanted to see if anyone had any questions about sort of like how we are approaching with these three questions, how we're approaching answering this question around effectiveness.
Doris, can you repeat the mandates for me? The initial ones that you shared?
The questions?
No, the goals of child welfare, the broader
Yep,
goals.
yep. So in Colorado, child welfare works to strengthen the ability of families to protect and care for their own children, minimize harm to children and youth, and ensure timely permanency planning. Is that what you were getting at, Maria?
Yeah, and Doris, would you just explain a little bit where those goals, those stated goals came from, if you will? Just in terms of whether it's Colorado or even just national discussion?
Yes, so those come from Colorado. It's from your child welfare agency sort of statement of the goal of child welfare. But I will say that again, even though it's articulated in a particular way for Colorado, those overarching goals around strengthening families, around ensuring that they have what they need to protect their children, minimizing harm, and ensuring timely permanency align with the ways in which jurisdictions across the country are thinking and talking about their child welfare system. And I will say that it reflects this movement to actualize a more family-centered, prevention-oriented system, even though systems are not yet doing the work in policy and practice necessarily to actualize those broader goals. The how we achieve those goals in the system as a whole is still a conversation that is very much underway. And again, is happening across the country in how child welfare can make this shift to be, again, more prevention oriented, more family centered, and what that ultimately looks like in terms of being able to give families what they need to meet their needs is yet to be determined.
Does that help, Maria? And because I just wanted to clarify, these are not goals that we came up with last night, right? And decided to call them goals, that they are grounded at least in the approach that Colorado has articulated that they want to move forward. And then again, to Doris's point, whether those things have been actualized or not is a very different conversation. So just wanted
Exactly.
to.
Yep. Thank you for adding that, Stephanie.
I'm
And
seeing
what,
Kathy with a question. Go ahead, Kathy.
thank you,
Yeah.
Trace.
I just wanted to clarify, so then that would be a shift from the traditional sort of safety, permanency, and well-being perspective of child welfare. Is that a fair description then?
Yes. I'd very much say that is a fair description. And yeah, I'll just leave it there. Yes.
And is that a fairly new goal or mission statement within the last, just say, 6 months?
That part I can't speak to. I don't know when the state adopted that particular language to reflect the role of child welfare in Colorado.
Carlos, it's a great question though. Or sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, and so just I want to just get back to Kathy and maybe Carlos's point. As I hear that, it feels like the notion of safety has been removed. And is that correct? Because I maybe didn't hear it fully.
The safety component is now in the strengthening of families more than in the child welfare agency, the way that I read their goal statement today, as as the state's role in strengthening the ability of families to protect and care for their own children. I think that's probably the most significant component in shifting from the notion that it is the state's role solely as an independent actor to keep kids safe, but really thinking about how state, county workers can support families to keep their children and children in their communities safe.
Are there other comments from task force members? Because this is important, because it really is the foundation of much of what we're going to be talking about. So just want to give people an opportunity to be heard on that.
This is Zane Grant, and I just have a comment, I guess, maybe more than anything that I'm concerned about. I represent the CASA organizations. What I'm hearing is that's in practice, but for us as mandatory reporters, I think people are going to be concerned about the safety and welfare of children, and so that's going to prompt the call or reaching out. And so I don't want to lose that piece as to, you know, we're not necessarily, our mandate isn't necessarily to change child welfare. We're kind of, you know, working in tandem with their goals and things like that. But for our perspective, we're talking about community members. We're talking about those who work in professions outside of child welfare that are going to need some guidance on what they can do to ensure children are safe and protected, and then we can let child welfare do their job based on their goals. So that would be my only concern in that.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really important point. Our charge is not, in fact, to revisit the you know, sort of like, what is the orientation of child welfare? What are their goals or mandates? How they articulate them? But as we think about answering this effectiveness question, it's effectiveness at doing what, right? And so it's either in service of the broader goal, or it's not as effective in you know, supporting or helping to realize those broader goals. And so we wanted to couch that effectiveness of mandatory reporting into that broader context, and whether or not what it seeks to do is helping to achieve those broader goals. Great questions.
There
And
are a couple of comments in the chat, Doris.
Yeah, there was one question also, just to note, I did put the language in the chat for, I don't remember who asked for that. I think it would be helpful to clarify the source of the language as well, because we do have our federal mandates regarding safety, permanency, well-being of children, youth, and families. Absolutely, we can provide that back to you as well. It was in, I can source the link and get that to all of you. But it's in your public facing content in terms of what the role of child welfare is in the state. Look at you, Maria. Thank you. Teamwork makes the dream work. And one clarification on the agenda, we're actually, before we go to the panel of lived experts, we're going to do some, we're going to have a presentation by Dr. Fong on some data. Hi, Jade, I see your hand raised.
Hi, good morning. I'm a crock pot, so I'm always like a touch after the conversation has moved on. I'm like, oh, now I know what I want to say. So apologies if I'm always like a touch late. I think one of the things I'm reflecting on over here is I think there's a fundamental or a philosophical conversation around the role of the child welfare system in prevention, and kind of, when does prevention happen? And do we believe that families that are at risk of child welfare, that the child welfare system is the right place to offer them the supports or services that they need to prevent child welfare involvement? Or does that happen somewhere else? And so I just think, as we enter into the conversation around mandatory reporting, are we talking about reporting abuse or neglect has occurred or is at imminent risk of occurring? Or are we talking about, I'm worried about this family, I think they don't have enough food at home? Because those can be really different conversations, and in my opinion, likely very different community members or organizations that could help those families meet those needs. And so I just think these goals are really bringing up for me the question of, are we talking about abuse and neglect? Are we talking about anything we might be worried about in a family, and helping to get some distinction there?
Absolutely, Jade. And I think that as we engage in more of these conversations, so we have like this parallel process that's happening, right? You know, we are charged with really looking at one, really narrow, set of decision points at the front door. While there's also this much larger conversation that's happening around, what is or should be the forward-going role of child welfare writ large. And if there is a shift, then the answers to that question around effectiveness then also shift, right? And so one of the things that as a part of, kind of the sequencing of our lived experts in, sort of bringing in various voices and perspectives is, I think ultimately will lend itself to some answers as to where Colorado is headed, as well as surfacing what that might mean, what those shifts might mean in terms of how we then think about what is the role of mandatory reporters, and both today and going forward, and where there could be some refinements in approach, including, recognizing that, and I think this gets to some of your points, Zane, too, around if there are concerns about a child's safety, and there is no other mechanism in place to sort of bring resources to bear to help that child and family, then of course you're going to report. So we don't want this conversation about mandatory reporting to sit outside of this broader conversation, and yet we do have a narrower charge in really looking at then, what is the piece around mandatory reporting that we can inform with where we are today and where we, where we think or where we know Colorado is headed into the future. I do think that the language around sort of this articulated goal of child welfare that reflects some of these shifts, at least philosophically, are hints at where the larger system in Colorado, at least aspirationally, wants to go. And so I think thinking about these narrower mandatory reporting questions in the context of what's being signaled in terms of this philosophical shift in trying to meet the needs of families in a prevention-oriented way, sort of using family and community as a primary intervention point for keeping kids safe, seems to be what is being hinted at in the goals that are articulated. And I see two hands up. I don't know which hand was raised first, so I'll just go with left to right. Is that Dawn from ECEA?
Yes, it is. Thank you. So I guess what is striking to me is that last July they established the Department of Early Childhood in the state, and I'm wondering about family supports potentially coming out of that department in general as a possibility. I don't. So that's what's striking to me, because no one from that department is in on any of these calls. And I know when there was discussion about splitting out and creating the department, they were talking a lot about establishing some prevention roles there and that sort of thing. So it's just interesting that no one's here, and kind of wondering about all of that.
I don't know if that's a Stephanie question or.
Sure. I mean, I can try and take a stab at it. Yeah, I think what you've just identified, Dawn, is a very likely gap. And so by way of saying, I'm happy to add that voice, that perspective on an ongoing basis, because as you know, the task force was formed and a lot of the membership was appointed right before I think people understood what that role was going to be over at the Department of Early Childhood. So it's interesting. I'm actually meeting with the Department of Early Childhood in about 2 weeks. So I think an important flag and something that we can certainly follow up on.
Mary Alice Cohen would be a great person to talk to for sure for there. Thank you.
You're welcome. Just as an aside, Mary Alice and I raised our children together. We go way back.
All right, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Dawn. Chris Menz, and then Yolanda.
Yeah, I would say the clarity of this also speaks to me on that statement that we're not doing anything to listen to the children. So I have been doing a lot lately with reunification through judges' orders, and the children are not in the system. To get any type of representation for the children means making multiple calls. I have dealt with a lot of narcissistic abuse, emotional abuse. And I guess because we're not seeing the bruises or the harm it's doing to our children, I'm not getting a lot of follow through on any of my calls that I make. So it's very frustrating when the child is old enough to start claiming that they do or don't want to do things, and they're not getting representation to be heard. Again, I feel like right now the law states for the parent and or adult, and I don't find that it's equivalent to the fairness for the child or their welfare. Because in all cases, I mean, as a therapist, a trauma therapist specifically, a lot of the stuff they're saying, you don't make that up when you're going through EMDR. You know, it's real, and you know, to not be heard is very difficult on them. So I think some of the stuff we don't, as mental health increases and the needs increase for mental health, I think the laws need to be aware of how mental health plays into this. We're doing red flag laws, we're doing, you know, the gun control laws and all this type of stuff. Well, how is that into the home of this aspect of it? So, you know, just think that we need to recognize a little bit broader scale of what's in the problem area.
Thank you, and wanting to have voices from multiple perspectives, including the children and youth, not only on a case level, but also as we're thinking about system-wide changes and recommendations. Thank you, Chris. Yolanda?
Yes, thank you, everyone. I just wanted to just comment on what I'd put in chat, because I feel like it was represented that somehow the state, which I assume to be what people would refer to as the Colorado Department of Human Services, somehow changed the role or the articulation of the role of child welfare as a system within the state. And I just wanted to make sure that I was able to represent the nuance of the context of where I believe that information was pulled from, and the link was in specific. I put the entire statement there because I think that context and is important when it's talking about child welfare services as a systemically across the state. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I don't want it misrepresented here with a lot of our community agencies and partners that somehow the State Department of Human Services changed our identifying what is the role of child welfare as a system in Colorado. So
Or the
thanks for allowing
priorities.
me to clarify that.
Yep, thank you, Yolanda. Or the priorities around safety,
Yes.
and you know, when that can't be achieved within the context of the child's family.
Yes.
Thank you for adding that.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And I just wanted to say also, just personally, I think that conversations and the feedback and comments that people have made really speak to the complicating situation we find ourselves in, right? And trying to improve the system, as well as really understanding those nuances when we're talking about from prevention to early intervention through to permanency. So I just appreciate everyone's thoughts and comments around that. So thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Yolanda. And thank you for putting the entire statement in the chat as well. Any other comments or reflections or questions? Scanning through my Hollywood Squares boxes. All right, fantastic. I think I'm passing it back to you, Stephanie.
Oh, Stephanie,
You muted yourself.
I sure did. Thank you. All right. So moving on to the next part of our agenda, we really have an opportunity today. I'm really very pleased to introduce you to Dr. Kelley Fong, who is an assistant professor of sociology at the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Fong is one of the very few researchers that we have been able to locate in the country who is doing really cutting edge work research around mandatory reporting. And it's, again, it goes to this notion of effectiveness, right? What are the goals of mandated reporting? And if these are the goals, does this law accomplish those goals, right? And so very fortunate to have bumped into her research. Dr. Fong received her PhD in social policy and sociology from Harvard University. And again, her primary focus is on child protective services as it relates to her research. So again, I would like to just welcome her. You do have your materials in your packet from her. There was a great executive summary regarding her research. And again, really pleased because we get to have a perspective primarily from mandated reporters. What is their intention when they report? Are their intentions or their goals met when they make that report, right? And what is the impact of that on children and families and communities? So with that, I would ask Dr. Fong, and I'm looking, there she is. Welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Really an honor to be with you all today to share some of what I've learned about mandated reporting. It looks like there's disabled screen share. Is there a way to change that so I can go through a few slides?
Should be good now, Dr. Fong.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, so let me know if this is not showing up for you all.
Good.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so thanks again. Great to be with you all. I actually went back and watched the recording of your first meeting. And so I know that this is a really impressive group with a wealth of experience in this space. And so my hope is that what I will say today is not going to be new or surprising information to you all. But I really wanted to bring some of this to the forefront as you do this important work of contemplating what it is that mandated reporting in Colorado is doing. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into the details of my research methods, but there was more information in the reading materials that were circulated, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So most recently, well, primarily I've been studying this in Connecticut, where I observed CPS investigations and interviewed a number of the key players involved in those investigations. And today I'm going to focus on my interviews with mandated reporters in Connecticut, as well as more recently in Atlanta and in Southern California. And I'm focusing on the mandated reporter perspective, not because I think that it's the only or the most important perspective for us to consider, but because I know that folks with lived experience are going to be speaking later this morning. And so you'll get to hear that perspective at that point. That said, I have also spent time interviewing investigated mothers and mothers who are likely to be investigated about some of their concerns and experiences with CPS reports. And so if you have questions, I'm also happy to talk about that too. So I want to start by kind of setting the stage in terms of the environment in which mandated reporters operate. Because in thinking about the effects that laws and policies will have, I think it's important to situate them in this real world implementation environment as opposed to some ideal world or vacuum that we might imagine or hope. So for these frontline professionals who are mandated to report, some of you I know are in this position, they are in their work frequently encountering families who are facing adversity, from poverty to domestic violence, mental health needs, substance use, homelessness. And generally they got into this line of work to improve conditions for people. So they're not content to just sort of let these situations be. They actively want to make things better for the children and families that they are encountering. But they come up against a number of obstacles in this aspiration. So first, as I'm sure many of you can empathize with, they are stretched thin. They have many demands on their time. They also can't do everything that they might want to do for a family or for a child. So maybe in their roles, they don't do home visits. Maybe in their roles, they don't follow up with children and families beyond an initial contact. Or maybe they don't have expertise in child and family issues in particular. They're also up against this ever-changing and often confusing array of social services. These services are often difficult to navigate, even for professionals themselves, or the services or resources that they might be hoping for just aren't there. So we have this inadequate social service array as well. And so for frontline professionals in this position, they're hoping maybe there's someone out there that knows better what resources might be available, or maybe there is something out there that I'm not even aware of that families can be connected to. And so for mandated reporters who are facing this dilemma, calling CPS is a way of resolving these problems. And so as I heard from one mental health clinician, she said, there's not a lot of programs that we have available as clinicians here. Sometimes we think CPS has all these resources at hand. That's the way we look at CPS. Oh, CPS has the resource for parenting, this, that, and the other thing. And so what this means is that reporting has ballooned beyond kids in grave danger to encompass families whom professionals believe could benefit from these kinds of resources for parenting or programs that mandated reporters are looking for. And so we should think about mandated reporting not as some automatic response to whatever we might call maltreatment, but as something that mandated reporters call on to solve problems. So one social service provider put it this way, she said, this is really the tool we have. They feel stymied, and CPS is this all-purpose agency that they're imagining can do everything, this magic entity that can compensate for everything there is that they themselves feel limited or constrained in being able to do. And what's important for the task force role, I think, is to think about how mandated reporting laws and trainings and policies structure this kind of culture in which CPS reporting is routine and is readily available. So this idea that if you call, if your allegations meet some threshold, some statutory threshold of abuse or neglect, which is often vague and general and can encompass all of these manifestations of adversity, then someone from CPS will go out. Someone will try and visit the family, check in with them, and see what it is that they can do to intervene. So for mandated reporters that I've spoken with, reporting is very much on their radar because of these laws, trainings, and policies. And actually, like just in the last few weeks, I've been talking to educators in particular in Southern California, and none of the recruitment materials mentioned CPS or mandated reporting. In my interviews, I have not raised CPS reporting or mandated reporting until the end. And nevertheless, almost every, I think maybe every single educator has themselves spontaneously raised CPS in the context of questions about how they handle concerns that they have around children. So this idea of like equating concerns with children with need to involve CPS. And so the messaging in the states that I have studied has very much been that the default should be reporting, this is the safe option, and that there's no harm in doing so. So what we're seeing is that mandated reporters' moral inclinations and their legal obligations are in sync. Their moral aspirations to do something worth families, to do something for families, are syncing up with the messaging that they're getting from laws, trainings, and policies, and kind of finding a home. Their aspirations are like finding a home in reporting. So what is it that they are hoping for or looking for, right? If this is a tool, what is the tool supposed to be doing in their minds? So the most common thing that I heard from mandated reporters, from 28 out of the 38 Connecticut reporters, was this idea of CPS as a way to provide support to families, to provide resources to families. And so this kind of comment was typical, where the mandated reporter said, we don't have enough resources. CPS might have access to something additional, or they might know more than we do in terms of what we can link families up with. Another educator in California explained, I don't feel scared or hesitant because I do think there are some resources that families aren't aware of, or just that extra push to get. And so my hope is that they'll get that help. So again, this interest in helping families, supporting families, offering resources. Second, mandated reporters hoped that CPS would provide some oversight of families, some monitoring, supervision of families, and this was mentioned by over half of the reporters that I interviewed, saying things like, you have to make sure that when the police aren't there, somebody else is holding them accountable, checking in on them, making sure that they're okay. And finally, a third goal that mandated reporters articulated was this goal of educating parents. And this was mentioned by almost half of the mandated reporters in Connecticut that I interviewed. And so as one domestic violence advocate put it, I think it's important for CPS to show mom that the kids are affected. I think it's important that moms know the effect of domestic violence on the children. So this idea that CPS can impart some information or guidance to parents to inform them so that they can do things differently moving forward. Likewise, a principal in SoCal said, my biggest hope, this is usually our mindset when we call CPS, is it's not like we want the parents to get in trouble. We want them to get some skills, support, just parenting classes, how to handle situations without anger, things like that. And so this general approach of calling CPS not because of grave immediate safety concerns, but for these other reasons of support and oversight and education, I think is summed up by a quote that I saw in an Associated Press article recently from a school social work leader. And this leader was explaining teachers' mindsets when calling CPS. And so this person says, even if teachers were saying, I'm going to report because I think this child seems dirty, we do that so the child can get the attention and some intervention can happen. Whether it's abuse or neglect or poverty, it is still a child in need. And so I think the question for us and relevant to the directive that's on the table today, as well as I thought Jade's comment about kind of what CPS will or should be doing in terms of prevention was kind of spot on to this question as well, is CPS reporting the right tool to meet these needs? What are the aspirations of mandated reporters that we want to realize? What's the best way to do things like connect families to supportive services or to respond to these children in need that this social work director is identifying? And then are there ways that our laws and policies can shift to facilitate that? And so I don't pretend to have all of the answers here. Here is where I'm really going to turn it over to you to do this difficult work in the task force of figuring out where to go from here. But I just want to thank you all. I don't know if we have time for questions, but you can feel free to reach out to me anytime. And I'm happy to share or talk more about any of this. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Dr. Fong. And we do have time for questions and would love to engage with you. We have until 9:15, just so folks know, and then we're going to take a short break. So would love to turn it over to task force members. I also, Dr. Fong, if you wouldn't mind, I really appreciate your key questions you asked there at the end. If you have those written down, if you wouldn't mind dropping them in the chat so that folks can really kind of chew on that while they're thinking about questions for you. I think that would be helpful because I kind of heard it as a directive of like, from your perspective, what you would be asking. So would love to share that with folks. But want to stop there and ask task force members, what questions do you have for Dr. Fong? And I'm going to start with Dawn.
Thank you. So I am wondering in all of your research if you saw that there were particular sectors that had a broad definition of what was required for mandated reporting, because we're seeing that in the childcare industry. If you have any suspicion, any kind of inclination, and I could include just putting a leg over a child at nap time, which could be dealt with in an HR approach. Instead, they're told that they must report, and then it sparks all of these different things. Did you encounter a lot of that?
I wonder if it's more rather than sector specific, like I'm not even going to say organization specific, but like organization, location, sector specific as well. So this is something I've become interested in more recently, thinking about the different ways that organizations engage with this law differently. And you all might see this, especially in Colorado with a county-based system. And so just to give one example, when I spoke to police officers at New Haven PD, they said, we call absolutely everything, no matter what. If there is an incident of domestic violence, if there's a child in the home, in the vicinity, it's a call no matter what, no questions asked. When I spoke with a police officer in another area of Connecticut, they said it's up to the officer. It's sort of officer's discretion in terms of whether they think the child was impacted sufficiently to be alerting CPS. And so I think even beyond the state laws or the state policies around mandated reporting, organizations also have their own protocols in terms of what needs to report. And as you were saying, there can sometimes be this like informal guidance or informal ideas of what's reportable. I think often teachers or childcare workers learn what's reportable by watching their supervisors, by having conversations with mentors. And so I think sometimes that organizational or institutional culture can really shape this as well. What we do know about sectors is that there's variation in the substantiation rates of reports from different types of reporters. And of course, it's a little bit hard to disentangle. Is it because they are seeing different types of things, right? So police officers will probably be seeing different types of situations than childcare reporters. But that said, what we know is that something around 90% of reports from educators are unsubstantiated, which is the highest unsubstantiation rate, or like the lowest substantiation rate compared with law enforcement, medical, and so on. And so educators in particular, and maybe childcare workers are included in that, are making a lot of reports that CPS ultimately deems not to meet the threshold for substantiated abuse or neglect.
Thanks, Dr. Fong. I'm seeing a few folks' hands up. I'm just gonna go in order that I'm seeing them. Margaret, then Chris, then Nikki.
Thank you, Dr. Fong, for your remarks. I work in school safety in the Department of Public Safety, and
it's got nothing to do with
just
the whole.
wanted to reflect that your findings in Connecticut, Georgia, and California are really consistent with what I hear working with educators and training educators in mandatory reporting in Colorado. And would share, I think it was Dawn's comment about there is this shadow of prosecution for failure to report that drives so many reports in education. And DA's offices, and I'm not judging the behavior, but DA's offices are very rigidly prosecuting the failure to report in Colorado. And that has a lot of educators concerned. And I so resonated with your comments about the reporters that you worked with saying, we're doing this because, it's the best interest of these families. We want to get services for them. We want to help educate parents. All of these really positive intentions held up against this shadow of prosecution for failure to report yields a lot of reports from education. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think the takeaway from my work is really, again, these moral and legal obligations, these moral inclinations and legal obligations, like really being hand in hand in sync. One of the questions that I asked mandated reporters was, if this were not legally mandated, this most recent case that you reported were not legally mandated, would you still have reported it? And they all said that they would have, right? They have this moral interest. They are seeing this child in need and want something to be done. But I don't think that this means that the legal piece of it is unimportant, to your work, to the task force work. It's kind of, as you were saying, Margaret, like this dual sort of positive intentions and diffuse threats or concerns about one's own individual livelihood and well-being. And so towards the end of my fieldwork in Connecticut, there was a very high-profile failure to report case, and it was a failure to report suspected maltreatment perpetrated by a school staff member. So it was like administrators learned of this situation and just dealt with it internally instead of alerting CPS, which of course is a very different situation than the situations that many mandated reporters are calling on. And nevertheless, this made the news. The administrators' pictures were in the news. The charges were dropped, but what we saw is that following that incident, hotline reports rose. I think almost every mandated reporter I talked to afterwards mentioned this incident, even though they were in a different area of the state, saying things like, you know, because of the circumstances there, we are erring on the side of caution. And so absolutely, it is not just the moral inclinations. It's also not just the laws. It is very much how these laws get prosecuted and how they get media attention to get mandated reporting and mandated reporting responsibilities in people's minds.
Thanks, Dr. Fong. I'm seeing Chris next. Go ahead, Chris. And we've got about 5 minutes left, just so folks know.
So thank you. That presentation was excellent. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. When we have you talk about the child in need, the resources, the process of determination, is there standardized lists that go down in each of these? Yes, we ask all these questions, but I recognize here that we go into this process of we'll take it to the team and then decide where it needs to go. And so it's kind of a group process who decides at what point it needs to be substantiated or unsubstantiated or even investigated. And then secondly, did you find in your studies that there's cross-state? So do you find that like if you live in Texas one day and then the next month you're living in Ohio, are CPS reports available or does that become only state specific and we don't have that information to protect a child in other states as well?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding I'll answer with the way I'm understanding your questions and you can clarify if I'm misunderstanding. So screening decisions, at least in Connecticut, are made by a hotline frontline worker with supervision from a supervisor, and likewise for investigation decisions. So for the most part, it's not a team conversation or decision. It'll be an individual worker with consultation from a supervisor. In terms of cross-state like records checking, my understanding is that they are not regularly doing this. So at the screening side, they're not regularly checking records in other states unless they have reason to believe that a family is from another state or might have some background in another state. Then, especially if it's a particularly severe case, they might reach out. But it may take some time for some of those records to go through. And so my understanding based on what I've observed is that they typically aren't taking information from other states into account when they're screening and doing investigations because the information takes some time to get to them.
Do you feel that would be advantageous to have a national database when reports are made?
I think we would have to think about some of the implications of that. I think it could be challenging logistically and also with folks with similar, like there you sort of get into like similar names, similar birth dates, things like that. And so it's not something that I have thought a lot about, but I did not hear that raised as a concern from the hotline workers or the CPS staff that I spoke with. My sense maybe is because people don't move between states all that much. And I was in Connecticut, which is a pretty small state for what that's worth.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris, on the questions. I'm going to end us on 2 questions from Nikki and then Jessica, and then we'll end there. Thanks, Dr. Fong. Are you good on time for a few more minutes?
Okay. And if you want to have the questions asked sequentially, and then I can respond to both, I'm happy to do that too.
That might be, well, let's stick with one. Let's stick with Nikki first, and then we'll go to Jessica. but I appreciate the offer. Go ahead, Nikki.
All right, thanks, Dr. Wong or Fong, sorry. This is fascinating to me. So I was curious if there were statements made by some of the mandatory reporters that utilize this child welfare reporting system more as intended, less about resources and more about child safety. And if there were, what were their reasons for reporting? And did you find any commonalities amongst those types of reporters?
Yes, so there were a couple of exceptions in Connecticut, and these were both folks that were involved in delivering intensive in-home services. So one was sort of around children's behavioral health needs, one was sort of around like family treatment and substance use and mental health sort of co-occurring issues. And both of these service providers were in the home multiple times a week for several hours. And so they are already sort of doing that kind of intensive service provision that other mandated reporters were hoping for. And so they said things like, you know, CPS is just going to put into place what we're already doing. And so my job is really to be doing this work. So if I hear mom spanked child, I'm going to do that intervention with her. I don't need to call someone else to do it. The other thing I would say is maybe something I'm like thinking about more and need to investigate a little bit more is maybe that there are differences in the types of communities across the types of communities that mandated reporters serve. And so, for instance, I spoke with a daycare director in a more affluent area who talked about how she wouldn't necessarily jump straight to CPS. She would make sure to check in with the parents. Maybe there was some misunderstanding. Maybe there was maybe there's some resources that she can offer. She maybe has the time and the space and the resources to be able to do that outreach herself first before turning to CPS. So those are the two kind of hints that I have, but it was much less common. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's Dr. Fong, for the information, for the resources. I enjoyed reading your perspective, and I really like the parallel of this idea of, you know, systems that maybe take on too many roles, that we end up relying on them, and the parallel with, you know, the view of law enforcement sometimes taking on too many roles and then ending up engaging in situations where, you know, we have negative outcomes sometimes because of that crossover. And the parallel there to CPS. I represent the Colorado District Attorney's Council and have worked as a sex crimes prosecutor for years. So of course, my focus ends up being more kind of on that, and being on this task force has required me to open my mind up to the other portions of mandatory reporters. But I guess I'm curious as to what you think, because I kind of have taken that theory and thought, well, from a prosecutor's perspective, when we've grappled with cases of failures to report, oftentimes it's not because, you know, the person was doing anything nefarious. It's because they wanted to, and they felt like a moral obligation to try to look more at and investigate whether the child abuse really occurred, you know, because they didn't want to throw out accusations or put the child or the family or the other student involved in a situation where, you know, they lost control over or where they would lose then control over where that investigation goes. But I tended to look at that as really, that's too much of an expansion of your role as a mandatory reporter. Your role, and it's kind of paternalistic, but your role as a mandatory reporter is to not make, you know, really moral or ethical or investigatory decisions, but take that baseline suspicion and give it to then the people who specialize in child abuse, neglect, criminal, crimes, and to give that over to the specialized units of CPS, law enforcement, in order to not blurry the role, if that makes sense. And so I'm curious as to kind of your thoughts on that, because at least as a prosecutor, that's oftentimes we'd have discussions and say, well, you know, we can totally understand that teachers know and I was thinking specifically of teachers because they tend to be ones that have crossover. Teachers know these students, they have relationships with the families. We can understand the emotional and moral like turmoil between feeling like they're jumping to a conclusion too fast and reporting it to a system that they don't necessarily trust to do the right thing. And I guess my philosophical response is always like, it's not on your shoulders. You give it to those other systems so that they can then deal with it. But that kind of that can remove the burden from the mandatory reporter's shoulders. And again, I understand that that's a bit of a paternalistic approach, but the idea is that then you hand off to those individuals in those specialized roles. So I'm curious on what you think about that kind of idea.
Yeah, so that's very much the messaging that is disseminated in trainings in Connecticut. You are not the investigator, you hand it off and let others sort of do that work of investigation. So absolutely, that's the messaging that folks are getting. I think the challenge is then you get situations that mandated reporters are seeing, not wanting to do that investigation, calling in. One of the focal cases in the study was, a child with a bruise at school, and then when the investigator went out, learned it was the child like playing with a suction cup toy on their face or something like that. So very, easy to resolve. The investigator nevertheless had to do 3 home visits, do all the records checks, talk to everyone, all of the whole rigmarole of the investigation. And then what parents said afterwards was, why didn't this person just ask me a question? Why didn't they call me to figure out what was going on? Why was it that they just jumped straight to this agency that's going to send someone out to my house with the power to remove my children? And so there was this real disconnect, I think, in terms of what messaging CPS and maybe laws are kind of setting forward in terms of mandated reporting, and then how parents themselves are experiencing the aftermath of that reporting. And so maybe that's a nice transition into the break, into the lived experience panel. But thanks for allowing me to share that perspective as well.
Dr. Fong, thank you so much for being here. I saw you shared your email at the end. So I don't know if that's an invitation for all of us to reach out if we have further questions. But I really do appreciate you being here. I know really rich discussion, great questions from the task force members, and certainly opportunities ahead to continue to engage. So thank you for being here. And I know we're sharing our digital claps as well. It's always funny on Zoom. I'm like, round of applause. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to end there. We ate into our break a little bit, but I'm going to give you a few minutes back. I do think a break is important. We're heading into a really powerful conversation with members of this task force with that lived experience. And so let's take some time, step away from your computers, do a little bit of self-care, and we'll be back let's do 9:30. So you've got about 9 minutes and we'll get started right at 9:30. Thanks so much. Okay, Doris, I'm going to add you as a spotlight as well. We're super excited for the conversation today. Sam, Nate, Shayna, and Tara are all members of our task force. And so Doris is going to talk a little bit more around the key questions we're really asking. But as we continue to look back at this directive of effectiveness, and we think about the need and the urgency around lived experience at a variety of intersections with mandatory reporting. We reached out to all 4 of you, and you all said yes. And so we're very grateful for your time today and your willingness to share parts of your story that you're comfortable sharing. I want to name a couple of things as we go into this conversation. We have an hour for this conversation. Doris and I will both lead us through these questions, but really want to just be listening. And then we also want to just be mindful that when folks share their personal stories, we hold space for that. And we want to be responsive to both what they're willing to share and also what they're not comfortable sharing. And so we defer to you all on what you want to share and what you don't want to share. We're going to actually shut the chat down for this portion of the conversation. And so if you have a question, please submit it to Doris and I, which will be the hosts on the chat. But we really want to be sure that we're not just throwing any questions and all questions at folks, but really that it's in service to the conversation itself. So that's how we're going to kind of manage that. So feel free to again, submit those to us, and there will be time for questions at the end. But we just want to make sure those are responsive to the conversation agreed to today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Doris, and then we're going to do some introductions and we'll get the conversation going.
All right, fantastic.
And
So
sorry, Tara is here. She's just not on video yet. So, but include her in the intros, and when she's on video, I'll spotlight her too.
okay, perfect. So we're just going to do a round robin for all of you to introduce yourselves and then provide, again, to Trace's point, whatever you feel comfortable sharing out about your own personal experiences with child welfare and the extent to which your involvement resulted from a mandatory reporter who actually called in the report. I'll actually start with Tara, or is it? Are you still logistically trying to get on video, Tara?
Yes, I'm.
Okay, I'll give you a moment. I'll actually go in reverse order then. We'll start with you, Shayna.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Shayna Karan. I live on the Western Slope in Rifle. I had my case in Garfield County back in 2019. I was reported on from my mother and one of my old best friends. And through those mandatory reporting, I had a court-ordered DHS case in Garfield County open, which was very eye-opening, to say the least. It's very, it's a new situation to be in, and when you are not expecting anything or even know anything about the Department of Human Service, you kind of get blindsided and you really don't know what to do, and it becomes overwhelming and unmanageable. And through my case, I realized that in order for me to make it through this, I had to have the determination and the strength to be able to find it in myself to do what I needed to do for my children to be reunified home. It was a hard situation to deal with, especially when it came to like holidays and you're missing everything with your children, and you're just trying to fight for your sobriety, and you're fighting for yourself through all the toxicity and the things that you grew up in. And it's an eye-opening experience, to say the least.
Thank you, Shayna. Nate. You're muted, Nate. Oh, there we go.
My name is Nate. I got removed from my mom's care when I was 8. I spent several years in foster care, group homes, things of that nature. My parents' rights were terminated. I ended up in juvenile detention, residential treatment centers, and ended up aging out of the system and coming back home to my mom. And when I was 18, I went to prison. When I got out of prison, I met the woman who's my wife now, and we ended up having 3 kids back to back. And one of my kids was removed twice, and one of them was removed once. And we had an open CPS case. We went to a termination hearing, and we ended up winning a 3-day contested termination hearing, and got us more time, and we successfully got our kids back. And now we live up in the mountains. We moved out of the city, and I live up in Georgetown, Colorado now.
Also, Doris, just to hop in real quick, Nate, you forgot one feature of today, which is it's Nate's birthday. So Nate, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Nate.
Yeah, awfully kind of you to be here with us. So Nate, happy birthday for real. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing that, Trace. What a way to spend your birthday. I mean, we're amazing. So yeah, you would want to spend your part of your birthday with us, but thank you for spending your morning with us. Sam.
All right, so Sam Carwin, she, her, hers, and I want to try and find the balance of honoring. Part of it is my story, but part of it is my mom's story. So I'm in a sibling strip. I'm the 4th child for my birth mom and my birth dad, though the previous 3 they didn't share. And none of my dad's previous 3 were involved in CPS, and then my mom, all of them were. And so I went into care when I was 2, was in foster care for 2 years until I was moved to live with my aunt for kinship, for temporary foster care while both of my parents were trying to get sober. I moved in with them in the summer, like end of the summer, and then my dad was killed in February. And so that is what actually led to us being adopted. The original call came from a teacher, my older sister's teacher, who placed the call that led to Dorian, me, and Renee all being placed in foster care. My mom had 8 children over 20 years. And I think that's important because oftentimes when people look at CPS and calls, they'll be like, oh, well, this person lost 8 kids. She lost 8 kids from the age of 15 to 35. She was a very different person at 35. But the reality of it is what happened when she was 15, 16, 17 created a bias that didn't allow her the opportunity to raise her children once she was older and had the stability that they needed, and had obtained her sobriety and so on. So I was adopted. My adopted family is my bio dad's sister. So that's my paternal aunt. And it was good when it was good. And my older brother suffers from substance-induced psychosis and some ongoing mental health and substance issues that led to a lot of violence in the home and never a CPS call. We lived in a beautiful suburb, a gazillion-dollar house. And that I really think was the difference versus when I was born, I was living in the Bronx. My mom was obtaining a lot more state aid, and there were a lot more eyes in our house asking questions and being nosy. And then for me personally, I had 2 CPS calls. One was in the middle of a divorce, which I feel like is something we need to talk about more, the way that people weaponize CPS in a divorce. The allegation that was made was that I was abusing not my bio child, but our shared child who did not have verbal skills. So my ability to be like, well, ask him what happened wasn't there. And I think that's another piece sometimes that gets lost is when we're working with kids who can't verbalize what is and isn't occurring in their home. The last thing I would say, my last CPS call actually came from my foster care agency, and it was very much another bullying situation. I let them know my kids had gotten a fight. I call all kids. Once they enter my door, they're all my kids. So my kids had gotten in a verbal disagreement, and I said, I'm not going to take that kid back. I was out of town. I came back to town, and I said, I'm not going to take this particular child back into my home while they're beefing. I'm going to wait. And afterwards, and they called CPS on me for abandonment. And so I then had to go through the process and explain. And luckily that was a pretty quick phone call. There was no investigation into that versus with when I was going through a divorce, they interviewed me, they interviewed my bio child, even though he wasn't part of the report. And then they interviewed the people around my other child who could not verbalize the situation. The last thing I would say for how I wear all the hats, and I think it's probably why I was picked, is I've also been in all of these service roles. So I did CPS reunification case management for years. I worked in a domestic violence shelter for 10 years. I did sex education, which for me is a preventative factor that we don't talk about. I did mental health case management, and I was a family minister. And so there's these roles where I've been expected to be a mandatory reporter, and I come from Nebraska, where everyone over the age of 18 is a required mandatory reporter. So it creates a very different dynamic. That was a lot. I'll try to be shorter in the future.
No, that was all really good stuff though. And we're going to come back to the dual hats and that you wear later on in the discussion. So thank you for sharing all that, Sam. Tara, so glad you could join us on video.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No apologies needed.
Okay, so my name is Tara Dockstader, and I was in the child welfare system as a child. My parents had their own initial case due to substance use, and I was in the system for 4 years. And then fast forward to 2017, I struggled with substance use, and my CPS case actually stemmed from a criminal case that I had been involved in. And so a lot of my case, I was incarcerated. And then we're going to fast forward a little bit more. Today I work in the field where I have 2 hats as well. I have several roles. One of those roles is I'm a peer recovery support specialist. And so in that role, I am under the mandated reporting. And then I'm also a parent advocate working with the ORPC, working with trying to get families reunited after children have been removed.
Thank you, Tara. So several of you have had, you wear multiple hats and also have experienced the child welfare system both as a child or youth, as well as a parent. And so you have multiple lenses, I think, to bear on this conversation and on this question around effectiveness that I'd love to tease out a little bit, specifically around, whether or not and to what extent this mandatory reporting tool is one that you feel like was really effective in helping your families and name, as you answer, name whether or not you're talking about family through the perspective of you as a child or youth involved or as a parent, but as an effective tool in order to meet the needs of your family at the time. And I'll just any of you who are interested in responding instead of calling in, any of you in particular, would love for any of you to respond.
I think maybe could you rephrase the
so clearly all of you described scenarios where I think particularly when you were involved as children, as a family situation that had needs. And so then my question is whether or not the mandatory reporting approach is one that you feel is effective in ultimately helping your family meet its respective needs.
I think it has positive parts about it. I definitely think the way that mandatory reporting had gone about in my case personally was not in a very effective way. I felt a lot like what Sam says, it's weaponized against you to make you look like a certain type of person and have these biases against you. And it kind of paints you in this bad light. So then when you're going through your case, you're basically fighting for your life of what these allegations may or may not have been, and if they're even accurate. And I feel like that was one of the biggest struggles that I had to deal with, was what people were reporting was not always accurate. So what the department was getting wasn't exactly what had happened and what was misconstrued. So it was made into something that it wasn't, which ultimately ended up into a case. So I think finding new ways of how mandatory reporting is used as not as a weapon and not in a biased way would be beneficial.
Thank you.
And not all, there is no universal mandated reporting lens. It's really, I feel like circumstantial, and there's just like too many unknowable contributing factors to why a reason may be making a report, and what it may appear to one person may not even appear to somebody who's in the same situation, just in a different role.
Yeah, so like what gets interpreted as reportable varies. Shana, it looked like you were going to add something.
I was just going to add to that. It was kind of like what Dr. Fong was talking about, is it's one person making this judgment and these calls, and it's not out of reason. It's more out of a personal perspective and what their morals and their compass puts them to.
Thank you.
Doris, can I tease out a question from Shana real quick? Shana, you mentioned there might be some positives. I'm just wondering if you're willing to be a little bit more specific around when you say that broadly, what are you referencing there? I just want to make sure we're understanding.
For me, a positive would have been even the mandatory reporting in itself was a benefit, because it did lead me to have services and be able to get control over my life to where I was a safe, stable, and sober caregiver for my children. It wasn't an ideal situation, but I feel like if I wasn't reported, I wouldn't have been able to come to where I am in my life and find such peace and resolution and be able to help other people now.
Thank you for sharing. So it did allow for an opportunity for there to be an intervention that you might not have had otherwise.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Sam, you were going to add something.
Actually, it was Tara, but then I'm up after Tara.
Oh, okay. Your box lit up, so I thought you were okay.
Sorry. I was going, but it's on Tara, and then I'm up.
I was actually just gonna agree with what Shana had said. Like, at the time of my case and when it was like mandatedly reported, I think that the intention of it was to get me support. I don't feel like I at the time I didn't get the support that I necessarily needed, or maybe like I wasn't necessarily ready for that support. And honestly, because CPS has been so weaponized, like it pushed me further away from actually getting me the resources and the support that I actually truly needed in terms of like my substance use. And so I do know, looking back on it, like hindsight, like that had to happen for a reason, and the intention behind it was good. It didn't necessarily take weight with me during that time of my life.
Thank you. So the intervention itself wasn't necessarily the catalyst for getting you the services that you needed in order to be able to most effectively care for your children.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, I feel like people have said it in different ways here, and it was said before, but the access to services that you then are able to have, and I'll speak thinking specifically of my birth mother, is the access to substance abuse treatment was denied. She couldn't afford it, but now you have a CPS case. So now, so yes, you are getting services, but those are services that you have sought and wanted, but didn't have the means for. So I think I just want to name that yes and of the services that people are getting. For me, I talk a lot about, I went into foster care. I lived with my older sister and my little sister, and my older sister has a lot of loss because when we went into foster care, all three of us were split up. And like most oldest children, when your parents aren't able to parent to the degree that is hoped for, you become somewhat of a parent. And so she lost the two children that she had been caring for every day to some degree, right? And we all went into care. We all went into 3 different homes. I was in 7 homes in 2 years. And so I can't act like that didn't impact me and how I navigate now, even if ultimately we were able to find a stable house. The fact is, in my sibling strip of 8, me and Renee stayed together and Cliff and Autumn stayed together. But most of us had no contact with each other. Once we entered that system, whoever adopted us became our person, or who took us into foster care, because my older brother was in foster care for 14 years before he was adopted. And just the level of loss that we experienced, I don't think I can say that it helped us as the children, which is supposed to be the focus area. I do think it gave my mother access to services. But I'll say the last child she had, Autumn, she actually had checked herself into treatment. They found out she was pregnant when she checked herself into treatment. They told her she was too high of a risk being pregnant in treatment and actually kicked her out of treatment. And she didn't get called on until she delivered Autumn. And Autumn had no health issues. But the fact of the matter was she had 7 previous CPS reports. And same with my brother Cliff right before her. That was her 7th report. And so just the ways that people engaged with her and the questions they asked were different with my first oldest brother, Omar, during which my mom is pretty honest about being in a sex trafficking situation. And no one asked the questions they should have been asking. They just looked around the house and said, why don't you have A, B, C, D? Your house isn't ready for a child. Instead of saying, which my mom says, I fought to keep all of my baby's stuff in that house. And they never asked why he had everything he needed. Does it matter if I have the things, if the child has everything he needed? And so I think for me and my family, when I was a young person, it gave my mom access to services, but it didn't give her tools. My mom was illiterate for 20 years. She decided to learn how to read because she wanted to be a better grandma. And so just the reality of what they thought she needed and prioritized and didn't have access to because she didn't have an open case.
And I think what you shared also, Sam, gets back to that that biased perspective that when you have, there's kind of like this cumulative impact that happens when there have been, once there is a touch and then there's a subsequent touch. And, so when we go back to that lens, for, I think both for reporters and also, once the, agents of the child welfare system become involved, all of that history and, those touches then come into play that, I think can have a biased and detrimental impact as well in what you shared. So, all of you have described a little bit of the, both the reality that becoming involved with child welfare enabled you to access your family to access services. And so that being a net positive in a way. I want to talk about, some of the unintended consequences or things that, that others might not be thinking about in terms of the reality of having had involvement with child welfare. Tara, we'll go to Tara and then Nate. You're muted, Tara.
Sorry, I was coughing and I didn't want people to hear that.
No problem.
So I can definitely talk about kind of the negative impact because my report came from and stemmed from a criminal case. And so in my criminal case, like there had been a no contact order. And so because of that, like I went a year and a half without seeing my daughter, and that had a huge impact on my relationship with my child and the bond that we had in having to come back into her life and her not having any idea who I was because she was so young at the time. And I can just speak a lot on like how much work I've had to do. And for a long time, I mean, like 5 years, I've been working on rebuilding that relationship with my daughter because that report was stemmed from my criminal case. And so that really took a huge toll on that bond, that emotional connection, and having to reinsert myself as her parent, and her not knowing that. And so I think that stems from that report, right? Like, not having any contact with her, not having any visitation with her, and certain things like that. So there was good, there was some good, but I feel like it caused a lot more trauma and a lot more harm in terms of being able to have that relationship and that bond. And to be honest, coming from my perspective and as a parent, like when you're not able to have your child in your life, you lose a lot of hope. And I think that parents need that. Like we need that hope to hang on to in order to get us through, to get us to being successful and being, productive members of society and being these fit parents that other professionals would like to see. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Tara.
Yeah, and then I had two things. The first thing I know, like for Shane and Tara, what I heard something that they both said that I felt like that was a common thing is that they both always had kind of desired the resources and the things that they were able to access, but both of them kind of agreed that it probably could have been under different circumstances. And I think the similarity is the relationship and the way that it affected their relationship with their kids. Because even though it does provide a space to offer services and resources, ultimately, if it still removes a child from the home, there's still generational trauma that's going to be created just in the act of doing that, regardless of how fast or how long it takes for your to be reunited with your kids again. And then the second thing I was going to say is like more like long-term unforeseen consequences, regardless of the outcome or circumstances of a case, whether you have your kids back successfully or not. When reports are made, and at least for sure in Colorado, of any nature, like for example, my wife, we had a DNA case, but our kids were returned home successfully. We have full custody of all of our kids. It's been that way for years now, and we live in a small community, a really small school where there's maybe like 100 kids in the whole pre-K through 12th grade or through 6th grade. and they wanted her to work at the school. And just because our reports exist in the system, whether or not all 3 of our kids are registered in the school and they see us every single day, multiple times a day, and they know our lifestyle, just because the reports are made, they denied my wife the opportunity to be able to help work at the school. And that was something like that they wanted her to do. And then she was like, oh yeah, definitely. She really wanted to be a part of it. She even gave them a warning. She's like, I've had a DNA case. And they're like, yeah, but you have all your kids. But whatever the way the policies and procedures are on paper, it legally prevents parents from being a part of their kids' school and to be able to help in extra capacities. So that's something a lot of people don't think about in the moment when they're filing a report. And if you see a child that maybe look like they're malnourished or dirty or something of that nature, in that moment, once that report's made, regardless of the outcome or how fast that parent's able to get the help and get themselves out of any kind of situation they're in, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if they have kids that aren't even born on the planet yet, they're not going to be able to help at their school, and they're not going to be able to be a part of the community like that, which honestly, in a small community like mine, looks really weird when you know all the other parents of all the kids and everybody else is doing it, and it's like, oh, why aren't you doing it? And so I think that's definitely an unforeseen consequence that a lot of people don't think about in the moment when their reports are being filed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
just to
that long-term impact, I'm sorry, Shana, that long-term impact, right, of having the records and what that could mean for future job opportunities or volunteerism and things like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Shana.
No, I just completely agree with Nate. Just looking at ever since I had my report filed, there's been opportunities in my life that I've been unable to take just because of that report. And people look at the longevity of the consequences that we end up suffering because of that report that went through. Not only is it just in our own life, but it's in the lives that we have with our children. I know for me, even if my children are not in my physical eyesight, PTSD starts flying. Like, I want to know where my kid is. Is my kid going to be taken? What's going to happen? And it creates this sense of uneasiness and trauma. It's honestly traumatic once you're removed from your kid and you're trying to figure out a way to reconnect that bond, but what you did wasn't exactly the right thing to do. But what are you supposed to do when you're trying to get these services? And without these services and you don't have a DHS case, you can't get them because DHS has priority. So it's like, we're not only are the kids dealing with trauma from being separated from us, but us parents also deal with separation trauma from us being removed from them, because those are our lives. That was our livelihood, and it was just ripped from us.
I saw you reaching for your unmute, Sam.
Go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, you go.
And I feel like I don't know the question fully, but so I'm gonna how I remember the question and add from what other people are saying. But I think the other piece for me was having worked as a foster parent and knowing why kids come into care and how many times I know my second placement I got was calling and making reports on her foster home, and nothing was taken seriously until she got it on video. But I know kids have gotten removed from their bio parents. And so there's this benefit of the doubt that is given to certain people. And it's usually people who have gone through some vetting. Me being a special ed teacher, when my ex called, changes the way that people heard the information, the questions they had, because, oh, you're regularly involved with kids. And so if it was so concerning, someone else would have had something to say. And so there's this piece to me that makes it, it's difficult when you do have or don't have the titles that make people believe you. It's difficult for me, when I was foster parenting, when the kids would tell me things and I'd be like, oh, how is that home still open? It's because it's the home in the town and everyone else likes them and all the other kids and those kind of things. When I know on the flip side, I did a diversion program where we worked with like frequent police callers to provide them 90 days of case management. And I look at these are people who are regularly calling the police for support, That is really why they're calling 911. Their kids are wild and out, was often the situation. And I'm like, how are we hearing what they're saying? Like, I need you to help me, not I need you to take this kid away from me. I think it is the real, for me, difference. And the last thing I would say is, if I make a report, when I have no more rapport with that individual, because 9 times out of 10, this anonymous report isn't really anonymous based on the information that you give. And so then we don't allow for ongoing relationship with families to grow and flourish in the ways that they could, because now they know, if I say this, you're going to report, or if I have to worry about that. And it actually, to me, creates more unsafe situations, because the people who can support them, they're not going to tell things to, because those are also the people who can report on them.
Thank you. Looks like we are getting some questions in from the chat. Trace is gonna popcorn those in for your input and response.
Yeah, so I think, it seems like a lot of folks are wrestling with just wanting to hear some ideas around the alternative, right? Like if you're in that like dream big space, what could this look like? So, want to give folks an opportunity to really share, like in your circumstances, because of your personal experience. And I hear, Shayna, you shared, well, there were some positive. I don't know that I would have, taken the steps I needed to do unless I was mandated. So we've heard that tension, but on the flip side of this, what do you think could have been done or should have been done differently in lieu of a mandated report to CPS, if anything? Just want to give you all an opportunity to really get specific around what that might look like for you.
Having a conversation, being honest, and sitting that family down or that person down and just having an honest conversation and say, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I don't like. What is going on? What can I do to help you? Instead of saying, let me send this to somebody else to help and let this go down the trail of the rabbit hole of who can finally help when it gets down the line. Take it as a grain of salt and be like, okay, this is what I see and this is what I think I can help with. Let me communicate with this family and this parent and see what I can do and what's going to benefit them.
I'm just going to piggyback off of Shayna and Sam. I do agree with Sam. I mean, she was talking about kind of building that rapport with your families. And I feel like if I had an individual in my life that attempted to build that rapport with me and asked me, hey, like, what service, do you want help? Do you feel like you need help? Like giving me the option rather than telling me this is what you need to do in order to get your children back. Like having somebody present it in a way where it came from care and compassion and concern and understanding that like this may not be where I want to be in my life, and I have no intention of getting like a CPS case, and I need help, right? And getting into that space and being comfortable enough to say I need help, and being able to go to those people that we were talking about earlier, those people that should be able to help us, but if we talk to them and we open up to them, like they could potentially just report it and open a case. And so making that a safe space and being able to provide people with resources when and if they need that and when they're asking for it, rather than saying, well, I'm just going to make a case and they'll deal with it. I think that would have impacted me and my case and in my life and not just me, but my children too, more than anybody could even say.
Thank you. And Sam, you named some of that too when you were you're sharing your mother's story about her need for substance use treatment and her attempts to access it, but not being able to have those resources to prevent you having to become involved in child welfare.
Yeah, I definitely think part of it is we have to acknowledge the lack of resources, really. Like, even if I want to get my kid in mental health services, what is that wait list? And instead of making it, here, you have an open case, now you can skip the line. We need to focus on the fact that the line is too dang long. And that for me is part of it. I think before a report, is a conversation. There's so many times a young person will say something, and the way I initially hear it is not actually the words that they are saying. And we have over-sexualized children, and our erring on the side of caution is really just catastrophizing situations. And so being able to slow down and communicate, I think, is important. I think the other thing, and I excuse my French, my sister is on this group that's like, am I the asshole? It's like, who's actually at fault here? And it's a chance for people to just write in and be like, am I seeing the situation accurately? And I often listen to people talk about others' parenting, and I'm like, is that the right parenting, or is that your parenting, right? And I think that that's something that people aren't really asking themselves in before they're making this report. Well, this kid might just have this particular thing to eat or only these outfits, and I think they deserve A, B, C, D. But do they deserve A, B, C, D, or is that your idea of parenting, your idea of what neglect looks like? Some kids want to eat buttered noodles every day, and that's that kid, that's not that parent. And I think what I have seen is oftentimes someone's own parenting bias of what a good parent looks like, what a healthy child looks like, what even a relationship between an adult and a child should look like, are the reasons for the report, not necessarily the conversations and understanding of where that child is coming from. It's a place of judgment and not a place of benefit of the doubt. And really, that for me is part of it, because we're erring on, I need to protect myself and my career instead of I need to prevent harm and trauma from this child by making a report that protects my career, but really does start a domino effect. So I think before the report, it's that. I have lots of prevention programs I can talk about in another day. But I really think it's our own bias. And I know we don't have anyone on the panel, and I'd mentioned this to Trace before, of like, when you parent with a disability, when you're a parent with a mental health concern, all the bias comes in tenfold regarding what your parenting should or should not look like. And that is something that you have no control over.
Thank you. There were a lot of nuggets in that, Sam. And I think one of my main takeaways is about the lens through which you interpret information, that then becomes what you say back when you make a report. And, so spending some as like a, how it sort of gets implemented is a different story, but like, this response that is spending some time really sifting through what objectively is happening and whether or not that then makes sense to report, or if I am overlaying my own perspectives on what is the appropriate way to parent or the appropriate way to behave in a particular circumstance, and then that being then what gets submitted. Shayna, I see you have your hand raised, and I know that, so Nate is still joining us. I think he's on, he's no longer on video. So Shayna, I want to hear from you, and then I will pause to see if there's anything that Nate or Tara wanted to add.
I think just looking in retrospective of other people's socioeconomic status and their cultures and what they're parenting from, what they were raised from. And I think really looking at cultural competency and being aware and educated that we're not all the same and not all cultures are going to do things as we see. So just being aware that and educating ourselves that we're not all the same and we don't all have the same values or perceptions of things, and really just excluding and taking your own biases out of it and understanding those families' needs, not even just culturally, but what they need socially, economically, for their religion or whatever it may be, just really getting in tune with what that family needs.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add, I really agree with everything Shayna just said. She actually put that really well. But I think that cultural competency is really important too. And I think part of the disconnect with mandated reporting is that it's when a report is made, it's no longer a member of that community, of that culture, or whatever the person, however the person, whether it be a teacher or a doctor or something, that's already integrated with that family. Once a report's made, now it's going to go to somebody else who more than likely, I feel like is not going to live in that community, cannot relate to the culture, that demographic. And a lot of times I feel like it's somebody who I don't know if I have witnessed it, where it's been somebody who's like literally from a lived experience or from that community or culture. Most times I'm sure those are the successful occurrences when maybe removal doesn't even happen. But I feel like a lot of times it is a big disconnect between the families that the mandated reporting is intended to help and the people that are providing the resources and providing those services.
Yeah, and I think some of what you're just describing in terms of, you know, what might the appropriate intervention be when, you know, there is an observance of a child and family in need. And I think Crystal Ward Allen, when she joined on the panel at the last one, you know, she mentioned that you know, some jurisdictions are looking at mandatory supporters versus mandatory reporters, and like, what does it mean then to provide support and intervene in a way that helps to connect families with services and supports that they might need. It could be an approach that complements mandatory reporting, or that replaces mandatory reporting, and thinking about you know, again, what might be the right way to intervene to address a kid and family in need, and in such a way that actually gets them to the services and supports that meet their needs in a way that is not about you know, making sure that you're protecting your own professional and personal interests by making a report.
Doris, can I jump in with a question I'm seeing?
Yeah.
It's just a little bit more specific around so it's in your, so I imagine you would answer this obviously with multiple lenses if you've struggled with a substance abuse disorder, but also in your current role is where this question is coming from. So I just want to keep that in mind. So they're saying in your current role, if you encounter a parent who is actively suffering from a substance abuse disorder, what steps would you take to help that parent and their family? And if you were a mandated reporter, what are you obligated to do in that situation?
For me, as my role as a parent advocate, I would ask my client around, what are your needs? Do you need inpatient, residential, IOP? Asking them specifically what they need for their substance use. Are you co-occurring? Do you have any mental health issues that are also co-occurring with your substance use? Putting the ball back in their court and really asking them, what are you looking for in this treatment? What do you want out of this program? And go ahead, Sam, I'll pass it to you.
Oh, no need to cut yourself short. I would ask them, who cares for their child while they use? There's this assumption that because someone's actively using, that means their children are around them when they're using. And that might not be the case at all. And so I'd ask them that, like, where does your children go? Where do they go during the day, in the evening? Who's around them? Because that not only gives me an idea of the preparation and the headspace that they're in and who they're centering, but also if a child were to be removed, it wouldn't be as traumatic because they're going to grandma and they're at grandma's house every weekend, or they're going to their play auntie. So I would ask them really specifically, you know, when you use, where does your child go? Or how do you prepare to use?
Nate, I'm going to cut you off real quick, just because this sounds perfect with Sam. Safety planning, always safety planning with your client and getting them to treatment, being that hand to actually bring them there.
Yeah, and I agree with what both Sam and Shana has already said, but I'll also add that I like to, when I know that substance abuse is a significant factor in someone's lifestyle and situation, I like to give them alone privately, you know, and a lot of time I feel like a lot of people know what their triggers are, what's gonna be the number one factor to prevent them from using, what's the number one factor that either brings them back to it or makes it really easy for them. And just like Shana said, I'd like to be that person who provides that hand, or whether it be getting the treatment or getting to services, or whether it be I'd rather not call this person to help get me around because that's who I've been using for a ride regularly, and they're a majorly bad influence in my life, or I'm gonna not go to this house or this neighborhood, or maybe I'm gonna have to be homeless for a minute so I don't have to sleep on a couch where I know there's gonna be active drug use in the house the whole time, and just trying to find other solutions to obviously the way that they've gotten to this point. The choices and the judgment call that they have made have not been the best. So I really like to brainstorm and safety plan and thoroughly go over the things that are critical, because a lot of times if somebody does have a relapse or a setback, if you've had these conversations before you even talk to them, you can probably more than likely guess the circumstances of which it happened. Like a lot of times I feel like people are really habitual in the way that they behave and use drugs. So I mean, if you have a clear understanding of what it gets somebody to a place of using, it's a lot easier to find a foundation to get them out of that place, I feel like.
Thank you. Tara, and then I see Shana, you also have your hand raised again.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and say, like, when I have a client or when I work with individuals who struggle with substance use, I build that rapport with them continuously because that is something that I'm familiar with. That is something that I can relate to. And I feel like because I build that rapport with my clients that struggle with substance use, they are more likely to be open and honest with me about their substance use. And that gives me the ability to kind of meet them where they're at and ask those hard questions. Do you want to go into inpatient? Is that something that you're interested in doing? Can I help you get that set up? Can I help you do a door-to-door transition so that you're not going through this alone? Because a lot of the time, I feel like the opposite of addiction is connection. And so really connecting with those individuals. And of course, I agree with both Sam and Shana and Nate and everything that was said. Where are your children at when you are using? Are they safe? Do you have a plan in place that is going to ensure that they are safe? Do you take them to your grandparents' house or to your cousin's house or because I think she's right. Everybody absolutely assumes that if you struggle with substance use, you're using when your children are present. And sometimes that's not the case. But if you don't have that rapport with them, then you're not going to know. You're just going to assume. And so I agree with everything that has been said.
Thank you, Tara.
Shana, just something to add is helping parents recognize their own self-sabotages and making goals around how to not self-sabotage yourself when you relapse or when something doesn't go to plan in your case, just helping them set goals to help them not self-sabotage.
So you all described ways to engage while also keeping an active eye on child safety, and have that as a part of the conversation. I think before just picking up the phone, and it might be in addition to, depending on the circumstance, but certainly before just picking up the phone and calling before. Thank you.
Doris, do you mind if I jump in real quick? I know
Not at all.
Okay. I know we could continue to talk and listen all day. And there's a couple of pieces of gratitude in the chat that I'm seeing that I think also just make points of around what's landing with the task force. And so I just wanted to invite a couple of people to share what they just shared with me. Maria and then Kevin, if you wouldn't mind just sharing around some of the points that this is landing for you.
Yeah, so I just mentioned, as Nate, as you were talking about, a lot of times the people aren't part of the community that are doing the investigations or that, get reported to, or don't look like them or aren't part of the culture. And that just made me think about how difficult it is to recruit into a system that has been seen in the community to inherently cause harm. So, for me as a Latina and an immigrant, thinking about other people who are Latina and immigrants to go work for Border Patrol, right? And thinking about like, wow, you're going to the enemy, basically, right? And so thinking about how difficult it is with the system as it is, how it's viewed of you're the enemy, you're causing harm, you're taking my child away, you're, you know, all of these unintended consequences, when that's the narrative in the community, where it's going to be so difficult to bring people who look like the community to want to be part of that system. And so I just think that that's very important to keep in mind. And also thinking about what we've discussed in the past, in past meetings, about having this like parallel type of referral to community resources that are going to look like the community and be part of the community, rather than going to this mandatory report of, okay, we might have to open a case or we might remove the children, because then a lot of those barriers will be removed. So that's just something that I was thinking about.
Thanks, Maria. I really appreciate you being willing to share that around what's landing with you. Kevin, also wanted to throw it to you. Kevin shared a really great reflection just on how this is landing on him as a professional and some of the reflections he's had. So Kevin, if you have a chance to come off, would appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everybody on the panel for sharing your experience. It's really, you know, it's eye-opening, and it just brings back this kind of piece that I have heard a couple of times in this meeting and then in past meetings too, about how as professionals who are in the role of mandatory reporters, we are trained and told it's not yours to think about, and it's not yours to make any informed decisions about. Your only role is to pick up the phone and to make the report. Don't think about it, just do it. And if you don't do that, we could prosecute you. And I think about the enormous impact that not thinking decision has had on everybody's lives. And I'm just sort of, it always kind of worries me when I hear government or other officials or people in the community say, do this without thinking. And I'm just so appreciative for your voice and for your telling your stories today.
Thanks, Kevin, for sharing that. Doris, I just wanted to give them a couple of voices of just kind of some of the reflections I'm seeing in the chat, and just really appreciate folks sharing as well. So go ahead, Doris, back to you.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing that. The thing that is bubbling up for me is, in your last share out around, what that engagement looks like. And I think you all provided, some, like, I think really important perspectives on how you can have conversations with individuals, and sort of tease out what they might need and where they might be, so that you can ultimately make a more informed choice. But the thing that I'm also thinking about is that when we think about mandatory reporters who are, who may not have that same skill, and who may not have the time or capacity to engage in that kind of dialogue. And so just want to hear from any of our panelists around any thoughts you have about approaches that, for law enforcement or, for, other mandatory reporters who, again, who don't have that skill. And, in thinking about like how we design something, if there are changes that, maximizes those touch points and the people that are engaged or who see something, and what their engagement might look like. Any thoughts you have on that? That was a lot of words. I know I use a lot of words, but I'm glad, Sam, you came off mute.
Nate, were you going to say something?
No, you can go ahead first.
I think people have to be real with themselves. I know these are topics I can talk about, A, B, C, D. I know I don't like this particular population. I know I don't work well with people who are in this particular, stop trying to act like because you went into this helping field, you actually care and want to help everyone. We don't. We all have preferences and groups that we do better with, and utilize your supports. So when I was a classroom teacher, there were some students where me and that student, I knew I was never going to be the one that de-escalates that student because of how I feel about them or because of how they feel about me. And so instead of me being like, but I'm the one who has to do it, I don't. I'm going to reach out to my para who's an amazing person and has a different skill set than me. And I think sometimes we are so siloed, especially our therapists who are in private practice, like they are the only one. And so figuring out how do we engage with the other people in our building, the other people in our circumstances, so we can have conversation partners who can navigate through it and be like, hey, maybe I come in and actually have that conversation, or maybe I can give you a tool, a book, a resource for you to help frame it because you are the best person. But I think we have to move away from the level of I'm responsible, so I'm going to call CPS because that's me taking responsibility, instead of I'm responsible to cause the least harm and to actually center the child, which means I need to do this other thing. And so I think it's learning yourself and building the people around you who can be that call to have the conversation with the family or to have the conversation with the child, whoever the person needs to have that first round of conversations with. We have to move to a place of community and support for our workers, because it is a lot on our shoulders as individuals as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all of that. That was all amazing.
Sorry, one more thing. I think we have to really look at our policies and our procedure. Like, I like writing policy and procedure because I believe that's where bias begins, is how we write those things. And so taking some time to connect and navigate with other people in writing those so that they can serve all of the people and not just be reactionary or catastrophize a situation.
Yeah, thank you. And I think so the process that you described, Sam, is one that is critically important, not only to making sort of better decisions about what the next right steps are for that child and family, but also for disrupting racism and other forms of isms that tend to impact populations, just because it necessarily slows down the process. And I think that's an important point as well, is that has the net benefit of potentially making less disproportionate or disparate systems. Nate, you were going to add something, I think, and then we are going to wrap up our panel and then go to some breakouts.
I was going to, but I think Sam put it better than I did.
Was that a mic
really
drop moment?
Yeah, that was. She did really good.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists who are also members of the task force, who were willing to share their personal lives and personal stories with all of you in an effort to advance this important conversation about understanding and addressing the extent to which the system is not currently effective as it relates to mandatory reporting specifically. So thank you so much for sharing space with us, for sharing your stories, for your vulnerability, and also for bringing to light some of your important insights about where we could potentially go from here. I think I'm turning it back to you, Trace.
Yeah, thanks, Doris. And I'm going to open the chat back up so that I'm seeing all this amazing gratitude in the chat, and it's just coming to me. So I'll change that so that folks can say thank you. But thank you to each of you. I know it just really appreciate your willingness to be here. And like Doris mentioned, lots of opportunity to continue the conversation. And I would like for us, so we've got about 15 minutes to send folks into breakout rooms where we really want to give you all an opportunity to capture some notes as a group, a small group, and have a conversation around these key questions, right, that we've been asking all along. And so we really broke it down to the 2 questions, similarly to what we asked the panel, similarly to what Doris framed in the beginning. And so I'm going to share in the chat right now a note catcher. You're going to go into breakouts for 15 minutes. Someone just proactively in your group offered to take the notes. You'll see your names on the left. I had to move a couple of people around, so you'll see some of that reflected, but just jump into your group. You'll see the questions at the top, and just want you to have a conversation and to capture that. There's also an opportunity in the survey afterwards to get really specific if there's something you don't want to share in that conversation, but we do want to get you all talking. So again, thank you to the panelists for the incredible, important conversation. More to come there. So much gratitude. And I'm going to kick folks into their rooms now. 15 minutes. We'll come back for public comment and we'll get you out of here on time. So thanks so much. Great. Thanks, everyone. Looks like folks are all back. Hoping that folks had a good time to have some discussion. I know that wasn't nearly enough time, but we're going to be moving more and more towards having some of these breakout room opportunities and different ways to capture feedback. And then in addition to the survey itself. So definitely give us feedback on how those breakout rooms feel, how that conversation feels. I'm assuming all of you want more time based on the head nods I just saw that you didn't get enough time. So we definitely know that, and we're gonna work with that in mind moving forward as we build out our agendas. I did put a note out if there are members of the public. I have not seen anyone so far request public comment, but I want to give that 1 minute. So if there is a member of the public on the call that would like to make public comment, please let me know in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone right now. We did have at one point up to 26 members of the public on today, just so you all know, with the number of folks from media as well. So appreciate, for those of you that are still on, appreciate you being here today and engaging in this work. For task force members, before I hand it to Stephanie to for some closing thoughts for today, I'm going to drop in a form. This is your exit survey. You'll see that there's only a couple of things that are we ask definitely answer for us, but we read each of these. It really helps inform the way that we build out agendas moving forward and just knowing how things are landing or not landing. So please take the time to spend some time with that and give us honest feedback. Put your name on it if you want to, or keep it anonymous if that's helpful too. And we just really appreciate your feedback there. Other than that, Stephanie, I want to hand it over to you to share some gratitude. I know we had a big, busy meeting today, so I'll hand it over to you and then we'll close this out.
Great. Yes, I just want to thank you all. As I look at the time, right, 3 hours feels like a very large period of time for us to convene, and yet it's 10:52 and I realize we've only all just scratched the surface. I do want to thank our panelists, first and foremost, really illuminated a lot of very important considerations. And I know at least our group explored those considerations, your thoughts, your suggestions, your experiences. So thank you, because those conversations helped inform so many of us today as we not only moved into the small groups, but continue to move into the future. So my gratitude there. I also want to thank Dr. Fong, if she is still here, I'm unsure. But again, we're just really fortunate to have data, information, and frankly, researchers that are dedicated to this very issue that we're exploring. And I don't know about you, but that brings me great hope that there's a lot of us working at a lot of different levels to try to address these issues. And then finally, just my gratitude for all of you. You're all extraordinarily busy. And what I appreciate is not just your time that you spend with us, but I see through your comments, through your interactions, even your response to our speakers, that you are here and really present, very present. I can see compassion, I can see thoughtfulness, and I just want to thank you for truly engaging in the process. So just thank you all. We will continue to keep you updated. Watch your emails. They're very thorough. They contain lots of information, and will continue to be our primary way to communicate. And with that, Trace, I think I am done.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll follow up soon with those calendar invites for the interim meetings and more information in emails like Stephanie said. Thank you again for your time today, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you all.